Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about what we're calling the 72% problem and why it's quietly costing organizations millions. I'll keep the agenda part quite brief because we're slightly pushed for time. I've seen how many slides Natasha has prepared for us, but we'll do some quick introductions. Then I'll hand over to Natasha, who's going to unpack what the 72% problem actually is and why it matters. And hopefully at the end, we'll have a little bit of time for questions as well. Do fire questions in as we go. We've had some emailed in already ahead of the webinar, so thank you very much for those. If you do want to ask a question, just use the audience chat icon that should be in the top right of your screen. Natasha, before we get into it, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So I work with leaders and leadership teams to optimize performance, but through a lens of leadership well-being. So having burnt out myself many years ago, I realized that, leadership capability was one thing, but leadership capacity is another. So I spend all of my time trying to help leaders and leadership teams to stay on track, basically, and avoid burnout at all costs.
All right, thank you very much. And for those of you who I've not met before, I'm David Richter. I head up the consultancy arm for the Happiness Index. I think many of you will know the Happiness Index because probably you either take part in our global workplace happiness benchmark. It's free to take part either as an individual or as an organization. If you are interested in taking part, we're still collecting data for this year's report right up until the end of this month. So you've still got a few days left. There should be a QR code if I click onto the next screen. A QR code there, which you can scan, and you can take part in this year's benchmark. We'll be releasing the findings from this year's benchmark, the global study, on the 26th of March. The event is already sold out, so if you've not got tickets for this year's event, unfortunately, you won't be able to attend. But if you'd like to be involved in future reports, just message us after the webinar, and we'll tee you up for an invite for our event in June, which is going to be focused just on the UK's data. So that's how most people know about us. For organizations that want to go deeper than benchmarking, we also have our employee engagement platform that allows teams to use any of our pre-built surveys, adapt them, build their own entirely from scratch, depending on what it is that they want to understand about the organization. And for my part, I lead the performance culture consultancy, which is really about answering quite a challenging question. And ultimately, it's challenging because most HR professionals understand intuitively that their people are going to have a massive impact on the performance for their organization, and in turn that the employee experience and culture for that organization is going to impact how those people perform as well. The challenge is knowing which parts about the employee experience actually matter and actually drive the outcomes that the organization cares about. I'll give you very briefly a couple of real world examples that we're working on. So we're currently working with a charity that runs residential care homes for very vulnerable people. In that context, obviously, performance isn't about profit, it's about quality of life for their people. So we're analysing what it is about the employee experience in that organisation, home by home, that genuinely affects the outcomes for the people in their care. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we're working with some retailers about what it is about the employee experience and their culture that drives metrics like average transaction value and conversion rate. So hopefully you can tell I'm very passionate about the whole linking of culture and employee experience back to performance for the organization. And that leads us neatly into what we're talking about in today's session. So absolutely delighted to have Natasha with us today. Natasha, I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, David. And yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I mean, this is a topic that is close to my heart. And so any opportunity I get to talk about it, I will take it. And for those of you who don't know me, I used to be a chief people officer. So my first career was in HR. And about 8.5 years ago now, I burnt out. And it was a massive shock to my system as somebody who thought they were a highly robust and resilient individual. When we talk about the 72% problem, we talk about burnout. So there is a big study that was done into leadership well-being, and it found that 72% of leaders feel like they're burning out. Now, that's just one study. If you look across many studies, it will be a figure somewhere between 40 and 72%. So it is a problem. We're getting to the point where, as a society, we are being put under so much pressure to perform and to sustain performance and to change and pivot and figure out the answers to actually some quite complex problems, that it's putting so much pressure on us. And of course, it's the leaders that are leading the charge, and it's leading to burnout. Now, I'm going to talk to you during the course of this session about why that's happening. I'm going to talk about the 8-stage burnout cascade. Now, when I burnt out, I was at the end of it. So I'm hoping every time I talk about this, I hope that it will be heard by people who either will benefit from it themselves or who will be able to use this information to benefit other people. The reason I got into this work in the first place was because when I burnt out as a leader, I had an existential crisis and thought, this surely can't be the way that work is. Surely we should go to work and be able to use our skills and our talents and our passions for good and make a positive difference in the world, and it won't break us in the process. We don't have to sacrifice ourselves at work. So when I realized that, I decided that I was going to go and help as many leaders as I could to make sure that they stay well and thriving. I mean, I've got a grand mission to help 100 million people through a more conscious approach to leadership. Now, that does sound very grandiose, but I sort of decided, I was challenged quite early on this journey by another coach who said to me, like, why don't you just coach people on a one-to-one basis and leave it at that? Why does it have to be bigger than that? Why do you have to have on some sort of grand mission? And my response to him was like, why wouldn't you be on a grander mission? Why wouldn't you try and help as many people as you could? If something had happened in your life that woke you up and made you realize that life could be better, or you could be a better leader, or you should be a better leader, but you just don't know how to, why would you not help as many people as you could? And of course, there's a societal impact here too, where I really believe that each of us has a duty to make the world a better place. I mean, that's my own personal belief. We see all of the atrocities and things that are happening in the world at the moment. And I'm sure that most of us would agree that we don't want those things to be happening, right? So part of my mission really is to help other leaders to be the best that they can be. And then, of course, that just builds a better society. So this is all very purpose-driven. And this is why, this is the thing that keeps me up at night, is how do I help to fix this problem in a more impactful way? So if 72% of leaders are burning out, and even if it's not as high as that in your organization, I think that it's probable that there are many leaders working within your organizations who will be struggling in some way or another. We were not built to deal with the level of demands and the level of complexity and the level of change that we now experience. It's being part of the industrialized age that has created that. And it's like we ramp it up every year. It gets, the narrative around do more with less becomes ever greater. We are under more pressure to solve more complex problems, even just AI now coming in. I mean, as if we didn't have enough to contend with. I know that AI is bringing huge amounts of value and benefit. I mean, I use it a lot myself. But of course, we now have to pivot to that. It's just another thing, another wave of change that we have to integrate into our organizations, when we may already trying to figure out how to reduce patient waiting lists, or find new clients because we haven't got enough to keep our workforce employed, or deal with some major issue that we've got on our manufacturing plants. I mean, we already have quite enough to be contending with without the level of change that we're experiencing. So how do we deal with this in a calm and considered way? How do we support ourselves to show up every day feeling optimistic about the future, and also just regulating our own system? So we'll talk about a little bit of that today, but ultimately I am talking about the bigger problem of why leaders are burning out and what we can do about it. So without further ado, we're going to go on to a poll. I would just like to get a bit of a temperature check on how you are all feeling. So where are you on your own leadership journey right now? So are you feeling like you're energized and thriving? Are you running on fumes? Are you feeling like you're struggling to cope? Or would you say you are experiencing burnout? You've gotten to the point where you really don't feel particularly great and you're worried about yourself. Okay, I'll just give a moment for everybody to to respond. Okay, that's really interesting. So what we can see here, it sort of backs up the stats. If we look at the people who are running on fumes or struggling to cope, or even at the point where they're experiencing burnout. And before I go any further, if you need to talk to somebody after this, just to speak to somebody else who has burnt out and who has been on a journey and can give you maybe some advice on how to support yourself, please email me. Do not suffer in silence. None of us should be. So please reach out. So I'll say that now before I forget. But that data is interesting, isn't it? Because it would suggest that the majority of people are struggling. Yeah. So that's normally what we see, because it's tough. It's tough at the top. And regardless of where you are on your leadership journey, you might be a leader of people, or you might be, a leader of area of specialism. We are all having to deal with an awful lot of pressure. So this, if we know that the people in our organizations, and we'll start talking about leaders, but I'm also going to talk about the ripple effect that burnt out leaders create too. If the majority of us are experiencing some level of burnout or exhaustion, or feeling like we're struggling to cope, of course that does present a risk, a hidden risk to our business, because there's very few businesses that are talking about this. And I don't want to raise it as yet another thing that you've got to deal with. Oh, now, fantastic. We've turned up for this webinar and Natasha said, we're all burning out. Brilliant. But now what we need some sort of burnout strategy on top of everything else. That's not what I'm saying. And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll maybe just have a new perspective on this. What I'm saying is you will be investing in all sorts of things that are people related anyway. You will no doubt be doing leadership development. You'll no doubt be focusing on well-being efforts. You might be putting some money into optimizing performance in the business somehow. When you understand that burnout is a key risk to your business, it may just mean that you do things slightly differently. So let's see as the journey unfolds. So I just want to give a very brief overview of my own experience, because, it's good to ground all of this in reality. So 8.5 years ago, I was a chief people officer in a consulting business. I arguably loved my job. This is the cruel irony. And actually, I met up with one of my team last week for dinner. I hadn't seen her for 10 years. And I told her what had happened, and she said, "Oh God, no, I'm really surprised. You just loved work. You loved it." And so yes, I did. And we'll discover why caring so much becomes a problem when it comes to burnout risk as we go through the slides. But I did love my job, and I was deeply committed to it. And I was very, very passionate about our people strategy and our strapline for that, which was creating the best place to work. It really did matter to me. I really did want to create an incredible experience for people at work. And the reason that I burnt out was because I couldn't. Even to this day, that makes me feel quite sad. And actually, maybe I cared a little bit too much, to the point where I became quite blinkered and turned into a sort of mini activist in my organization, where I was the one saying, this isn't good enough. We need to do better as leaders. We've got to take better care of people. And I was really the only one challenging the status quo. And at the time, I didn't really know much about psychological safety. That wasn't really on my radar. I think it's been popularized in more recent years. But this idea that you can speak up and tell the truth about the things that need to change without any risk, and knowing that people are going to listen to you and say, oh yeah, actually, you might be right here. So what should we do about it? And unfortunately, at the time, for all sorts of reasons, my voice was just disruptive. My voice, where I was saying, we need to be better leaders. We need to lead the charge. We need to role model healthier behavior. For a whole pile of different reasons, not least because probably a lot of the leaders around me were burning out, just fell on deaf ears. So what happened was, sort of over the course of about 12 months, it really led to an erosion of my trust in the organization, trust in my peers. And then towards the end, I lost all confidence in my ability to do my job. because the thing that mattered the most for me, which was creating the best place to work, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't move the dial as much as I wanted to. And I'd been there for 10 years. I mean, there'd been a lot of great things we had done. But anyway, so I was a very robust and resilient person, and I just fell. And it was like a cataclysmic burnout. And I don't want anybody to ever suffer from this. And lots of people, unfortunately, that I speak to say that they have burnt out to some extent. So with all of that in mind, I want to reinforce this point, and this is what the research absolutely makes very clear now, that it will be your highest performers that burn out first, because they care the most. They're the most conscientious. They want to make a difference. They're deeply committed. So, and that stands for your leaders too. If as leaders you think, right, my job, my purpose, my role is to make a meaningful difference here, you will go all out to do that. You will be waking up in the middle of the night thinking, how do I fix that problem? It will encroach in your personal relationships. You will stop seeing your children. So it is the people who are deeply committed, who really want to make a difference and for whom this really matters, that will burn out first. So whereas historically we may have seen burnout as a sign of weakness or a capability problem, it's not. So let's just eradicate any potential ideas that because you feel like you aren't coping at the moment or because you're burning out that you're not capable. Absolutely not. The opposite is true. So I think it's really important to share that. This is a systemic problem. You can't just fix it with a resilience workshop or a bit of LinkedIn learning. It is systemic in that the organizations that truly thrive create an ecosystem that regulates the nervous system of the people that operate within it. So we can all think of organizations that we've worked in where we have felt very anxious and very stressed a lot of the time. And then you may also have examples of teams where you've worked where it's just felt really enjoyable. It's just been a really enjoyable place to be, notwithstanding the fact that nothing is perfect and there will be pain points in any job and any organization. So we need to think about this burnout creation or this burnout problem as something that is actually created through the way that the sort of system works. And we'll talk a little bit about that today, but also I do want to talk about what you need to do for your leaders in order to help them overcome this risk of burnout. Now, I've got a wonderful relationship with the Oxford Review, and I have to credit them because David Wilkinson, who's the editor of the Oxford Review, he's been so pivotal in my journey as a leader and business owner. And for any of you that don't subscribe to the Oxford Review, shout out to them because they basically, based out of Oxford University, David Wilkinson is a leading academic. He teaches a lot of the academics there to teach. So he really understands learning. He is an expert in all things people. So what they do is they take all of the research into people-related topics and then they turn it into briefs that you and I can read that isn't academic, that's understandable. And what David kindly did for me towards the end of last year was that he did a 20-year review of the research into leadership burnout, and it was just incredible. And bearing in mind I specialize in this, so I specialize in leadership, performance, well-being and burnout. There was things in this research that I wasn't aware of. And a couple of things came out very strongly. One is that leadership health is a lead indicator of performance in organizations. So this isn't an HR problem. Burnout is not an HR problem. It's an operational problem, it's a strategic problem, and it's a performance problem. So in terms of ROI and demonstrating ROI and building a business case for investing in keeping leaders well, the research points to the fact that when leaders are well, organizations will flourish. So, and there's plenty of data behind that, and I'm more than happy to share more of it after this if anybody's interested. And this other idea that most leadership development programs completely miss the fact that leadership health is a lead indicator. So we're putting all of these billions of pounds of investment into helping to develop leadership capability and help leaders to lead better. So be more, whatever model you subscribe to, transformational leadership with the vision, authentic leadership with the be more you, be more open, be more transparent, and other, servant leadership is a really good example here of where you're saying, right, serve, constantly give out, give to other people, make sure everybody else is okay. And of course, just this sort of slow drip feed out of you, you're pouring all of your energy out to everybody else, and there is nothing coming back to replenish you. So the big shout out, call out here is that leadership development programs, any form of leadership development that you do, absolutely needs to speak to capability and capacity, because burnout is not a capability issue. It's a capacity issue. It's purely because we were not built to deal with as much complexity and pressure as we're facing these days. So anything that you do with your leaders and any interventions that you put in place from a sort of more systemic perspective needs to understand that. So burnout prevention becomes a performance strategy. It's not, a well-being initiative. It's not a leadership development program, although it absolutely could form part of a leadership development program. And it was interesting because I did some work with JP Morgan Chase. They were one of my first clients when I created Conscious Leadership. And I can remember being in a meeting with the decision maker who was going to be signing off on this. He was an MD from one of their divisions. And there was him, and there was also the HR lead in the room. And she said, "Oh, I think this is well-being. So what we'll do is we'll put you in touch with our head of well-being, and she can take things forward." And he stopped her in her tracks, and he said, "This isn't well-being. This basically sits right in between well-being, performance, and leadership development. It's the thing that sits in the middle of all of them. So this is owned by us. This is an operational thing." And thankfully, he signed off on the project, and so they put it in place as a performance strategy. So this is about how you make sure that you keep the people that you're highly dependent on in your organization, the leaders, performing and sustaining their energy over the long term, despite the challenges that they're facing around them. Because if we don't do that, what are some of the ripple effects? Well, the research, this 20-year review, pointed to the fact that burnt out leaders are 3 times more likely to lose top talent. And under burnt out leaders, 47% of employees are going to burn out themselves. So it is a huge cascade effect in your organization. Unless your leaders feel well and calm and in control and regulated, then they're going to struggle to create that regulation in their teams. And we'll talk about all of the great things that well leaders do later on. So in terms of organizational challenges, I think it's probably worth us looking at what you're facing at the moment. So what organizational challenge are you most concerned about? It'd be really interesting to hear, and we'll pull up the poll and you can answer that. So unfortunately, we can only put 6 options in these polls because I think we could have put 20. But, is it about retaining top talent that you're most worried about? Is it change initiatives either stalling or not going well? Is it engagement? Is it leadership burnout? Is it performance, or is it leadership capability? So we'll just give you a moment to fill that in. I love doing these polls because it's so interesting to see what's actually happening in reality in your worlds.
Are you finding it surprising, Natasha?
The results. Well, I'm really, really pleasantly surprised because we're here with the happiness index, and obviously, engagement is very important. Am I finding it a surprise? Well, so let me tell you what I can see. So I'm not finding the fact that leadership burnout isn't higher a surprise, because most people don't know it's a problem, because it's underground. It's never spoken about. Leaders want to style it out and pretend everything's okay. But of course, we saw from the results earlier on that everybody is not okay. So, it's a hidden thing. So most of the time we wouldn't know about it. But no, I guess, change, it's good to see that there's not more change initiatives not sort of going according to plan. But engagement and leadership capability, I would say they're probably, top of the agenda most of the time. What about you?
Yeah, I think it's very much skewed by the audience that we've got attending today. I know that obviously a lot of people that we speak to, when they get in touch with us, it's because they are concerned about employee engagement. So not at all surprised to see that high up there. Slightly surprised that performance is low, because I'm trying to bang the drum about tying the whole employee experience back to performance at an individual and an organisation level. So if you can marry those two up, I would argue that that's got to be a good thing for everyone, not just the employees, but the organisation as well.
Well, it's probably a whole other webinar, because I've got to admit, when I was CPO, we didn't have performance on one of our objective lines. Okay. As part of our annual strategy, it would be engagement, or it would be leadership capability. Performance being the outcome. But I think you're right. I think increasingly I'm hearing more and more, especially like C-suite leaders or senior leaders, saying, well, what's the ROI on this? Like, why would we do it if it didn't contribute to better performance? And I think we probably need to get better at that conversation, and that the story is actually all around performance, because ultimately it is. There's very few altruistic companies that just do things because it's a nice thing to do. There are some, and I love them. But most of the time we're trying to optimize for performance. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. So just moving on to the next slide. So talking about performance, that's like beautifully teed up there. Interestingly, when you have healthy leaders, we'll describe a little bit more what that looks like later. They're 2.2 times more likely to exceed financial targets. Now, I mean, this is an oldish piece of data, but I do like the research that Burson and his organisation do, and they created a report back in 2021 called The Healthy Organisation. And I love it. I mean, I still refer back to it now, but they broke down in quite a lot of detail as to what a healthy organisation looked like. And this data point was taken from there. When you have a healthy organisational system where people behave in a way that supports each other, of course, the outcome's going to be brighter. But unfortunately, where that's not the case, where you do have leaders who aren't either, where they're burning out, or where they're not clear about the very, very clear behaviours that need to be demonstrated in order to drive performance, then you have problems. And I've got to admit, I mean, I think back to this story quite frequently, but I can remember a leader coming to me maybe, 12 years ago, and saying to me, the morale in my team is not good, and I don't know why. Now, I would argue he was one of our better leaders, and was just such an incredibly lovely guy. And I said, well, how often do you see them? And he was like, oh, no, I rarely see them. I'm out delivering projects. I was like, but how often do you go into the office to see them? And he was like, yeah, maybe like one. This was before pandemic, obviously, when people did go into the office. Once every couple of weeks. And I was like, well, what do you do when you're in the office with them? And he was like, well, I mean, I'm normally quite busy, so I'm in meetings. Anyway, the moral of the story was he wasn't connected to his team at all. He was a really nice guy. He was such a lovely person, but he just wasn't leading. And I can remember thinking at the time, I wish I could just tell him what like the 5 things that he needed to do were to solve that problem. And 12 years ago, I couldn't tell him that, ironically. But I've done a lot of work over the last 8 years, so I can now answer that question. But when you get it wrong, when you're not focused on the right things, and leaders are struggling to focus on the right things at the moment because they're under so much pressure, it causes all sorts of problems, decreased productivity, more errors. You get a loss of knowledge when leaders are not sharing, they're not developing the team, not creating an environment of togetherness where knowledge is being shared. And that obviously then impacts engagement and sickness and, objectives being met in a timely way or an effective way. But also when leaders are burnt out, It leads to strained relationships. It can impact health, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But of course, it puts stress on other elements. It leads to relationship difficulties at home. And of course, ultimately, when it goes on for long enough, it leads to a lack of confidence or a loss of confidence. I do lots of one-to-one coaching with senior leaders. And the one thing that stands out to me is that you can have somebody who seemingly is this incredible leader that people really like and that has a lot of respect and maybe is doing a pretty good job, but underneath it all, they're hiding this imposter syndrome. There's so much imposter syndrome in leadership. Now, if you already have a little bit of imposter syndrome and self-doubt, and unless you're a sociopath or a narcissist, most of us doubt ourselves at some point. An environment that's putting us under way too much pressure and where we're not actually able to deliver the things that we expect to be able to deliver for all sorts of reasons to do with that pressure, you can imagine how it can really, really damage our confidence. So you're just building on a slightly shaky foundation anyway. And there's a strong correlation between high performance and imposter syndrome. So the better you really should be, or the more you're capable of, the more you're going to doubt yourself, because the more aware of the fact that you're imperfect. So this becomes a human problem, because I don't see this as an HR problem. I see this as being a strategic performance risk. I put a little anecdote in there from a chap that I coached for quite some time, and when I went into that organization to work with him, he terrified people. He was absolutely terrifying, and by the end of it, he was a coach. Unbelievable. But the damage he did, in the meantime, was significant. So, we do really need, and most of it was actually the fact that he couldn't regulate his own system. So that it was a capacity issue. He just couldn't stay regulated. He needed some help. So we can't just leave leaders to sort of sit there and suffer. We do need to help them. And in terms of what's going wrong, the three main things that are leading to leadership burnout and which are demonstrated in this research are these. So one is emotional labor. So you're sort of constantly projecting confidence while stressed. Then there's self-control. So you're needing to put other people first. So you have to sort of put other people's emotions first and other people's needs ahead of your own. So you're trying to stay in control of your own emotions. And then it's energy transference. I talk about it like, all of the people that you lead and that are in your ecosystem, if they're plumbed into you with an umbilical cord, and that's just constant, you're just constantly feeding them, there's very little reciprocal energy in a leadership relationship. Most of the time you're giving it out. There's not many people that are giving it back to you, unless you've got an incredibly good peer group, in which case that can be really good. But in lots of leadership roles, that's not the case. Leaders are lonely. They don't have great peer relationships. Being a great leader and constantly giving out and constantly making sure that everybody else is okay and trying to show this, paint this picture that everything's fine despite the pressures that are being faced is what actually leads leaders to burning out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you fix this problem. But to begin with, I just want to see where you're already investing your time and efforts and money into leadership development. So just looking down this list, so traditional leadership programs, so that have been designed out for you, or you've bought one off the shelf. Are you getting experts in? Are you running webinars? Are you doing executive coaching, team building? Nothing really. Or you have invested, but you're not seeing any results from what you've done.
Have you seen these options or where people are investing? Have you seen that change over time, particularly since COVID? I know COVID was a long time ago now, but there's a sort of before and after time, isn't there?
Yeah. So my main observation would be that they're making it just super easy and quick. These much longer programs where you get people together over the course of days, weeks, are less likely to happen. And, we're more likely to run a webinar or executive coaching is still prevalent. I see executive coaching being used a lot. But I also see, I mean, nothing significant. We've got 25% here. I also see that, I see where they're just not focused on that. All the L&D efforts would be going into the workforce if they're going anywhere and not into the leadership. So that's really interesting. And it's interesting to see that, executive coaching is still a heavy investment, and certainly for this audience. Okay, well, let me move on. So we need to be really aware of the fact that we've fallen into this sort of do more, be more trap when it comes to leadership development, and that, just developing capability of leaders isn't enough. We have to treat both the capability issue and the capacity issue in order to allow leaders to be able to support themselves, actually, but to create an ecosystem where leaders feel supported. And that's often where I find that the work that I do has the biggest impact. When you create this safe space for leaders to have honest conversations about what's really going on, and then you create psychological safety where peers can talk to each other about those things and help to solve them together, you just fortify the system, really. And if we think about fortifying the system, where leaders are burning out, they're not creating psychologically safe environments. They're much, much less likely to be supporting learning. So if you're trying to create like a coaching culture or a learning culture, and a lot of the companies that I work with would be trying to do that, burnt out leaders can't do that. I mean, it's much harder because they're just putting out fires. They're not thinking about, let's sit down and have a great quality conversation about learning. And also because of that lack of psychological safety, and because now your leaders are being sort of almost pushed into like a defensive stance, it creates this lack of adaptability and a lack of resilience. And interestingly, I've got a psychometric that measures resilience, or we've created one. And it's amazing to see how many leaders have got very little resilience. They might present as really resilient, but under the surface, they're actually really struggling. So what leads to all of this? If we look at what burnout really is, it's not just something that happens overnight. It's a gradual deterioration. And interestingly, it normally starts with doing more. It's not, you don't just get to the point where you're like, oh, right, I can't do this, or I'm struggling. Normally you go into hyperdrive. So you try and do even more, you work longer hours, and that can last for quite some time. Until the point, of course, you get exhausted and now you're just knackered. So then you've got reduced activity, and that's where you start to get more cynical and emotional as a leader, because now you're in the sort of panic zone, or you're worried, or you're feeling disenfranchised, or you're feeling disengaged. And, we often don't talk about leadership engagement in organizations, but leaders need to be engaged too. So as soon as you have a leader who's now becoming disengaged for whatever reason, it's problematic. So that stage where a leader becomes emotional is a real problem for the team, because they'll often be telling the truth now at this stage. All of the illusion of everything's fine goes out the window, and they're like, no, this really is rubbish. Or, I can't believe that guy did that, or this person did this. And so that is insidious in a team and, causes real issues. And then they get to the point where they just start to break down, and then they'll often withdraw. And then by the time you've gotten to the ends of the burnout cascade, your physical health is being affected. Often we think that's one of the first things to be affected, but most of the time it's where there's more serious physical ailments. That's normally a consequence of a long period of not paying attention to how you feel. And then normally at stage 8, that's total breakdown. I mean, that would be where you as HR professionals would see people having to take time out of the workplace because they simply can't function. So, it's not great. And you will be able to see, based on this 8-stage cascade, hopefully, where you sit. Now, the journey back from 1 or 2 is easy, and the journey back from 7 or 8 is really not. It takes a much, much longer time to recover from 7 or 8. So what we want to be doing is making sure that, 1, our leaders don't even get to the point where they move beyond 1, or if they have, that they've got some sort of decompression chamber and understanding of how to move themselves back. So how do you fix it? Well, I mean, when I burnt out, and came out of the workplace and thought, well, what the hell happened there? It quite quickly dawned on me with a bit of space that it had been a lack of consciousness that had led me to my fate. So, and actually, as I was burning out in the last year of my tenure as a leader of an HR team, my team started to fall apart. I mean, really did. And bearing in mind, I've been a leader in that team for 10 years. And I just, they started fighting with each other. They started getting really cynical, but I was cynical, so it really did impact them. And I realized it was just a lack of awareness. I didn't know how to sustain my own energy under times of pressure, or when I wasn't able to, I guess, move the dial on something that was really important to me. I didn't understand the extent to which the environment was compromising my values and my purpose. I didn't really even realize I had a purpose at the time. I just didn't understand myself. And I wasn't aware enough of the very, very specific traits that a leader needs to demonstrate in order to make sure they get the most out of their team. So I created this conscious leadership framework, which I worked with University College London to have validated, to sort of create a model that could be used by other leaders to help them navigate all of this, which is about basically becoming more aware as an individual, enabling yourself to take care of your own resilience and energy, but also creating psychological safety in teams. And I've got to admit, I didn't have enough awareness of the power of psychological safety in teams at the time. So I created this model, a five pillar model, which was built around this idea that we're in it together. So how do we do everything together? And that's the psychological safety piece. We need clear purpose. So where are we heading and how are we going to get there? We all are learning all of the time. So how do we make sure that we don't get into a situation where we start being fearful of mistakes or things going wrong? We have to absolutely embrace the fact that we're imperfect and human and things will go wrong. And how do we solve that together? It's about being self-aware and awake. And then it's about having the right mindset to build resilience so that you know that the way that you're showing up every day is supporting yourself and the people around you. But what was even more interesting is that there were a number of traits that came out of our own research into what really excellent leadership looked like. So we interviewed a lot of people, and we did this with UCL, so that it was valid and reliable. But when you had a really incredible experience of a leader, what is going on, and we synthesized all of the data and came up with these 7 core traits. So, a conscious leader, a well leader, a leader who isn't burning out. They see you, so they connect with you. They have your back, so they're able to support you. They are present and engaged, so you know that they are there. They're not just there in body, they're in mind and spirit too. They trust you, so they're delegating and they're empowering the people around them. They give very clear direction. Sometimes that means having very difficult conversations, but they're happy to do that. They are welcoming challenge, so their nervous system is regulated enough and they're secure enough to be able to take it as well as give it. And they stretch you, so they get the team to the point where they're optimized because they're building on strengths. They know what people's passions are, they know what people are good at, and they're developing them to make sure that they're doing great work. Now, the thing is, you can't be this sort of leader. So if this is the sort of leader that does incredible things and builds these amazing high-performing teams, you can't do that unless you are these things. So you have to be self-aware, you have to be regulated, your nervous system has to be regulated, and you have to be low ego. It can't be all about you, it has to be all about them. But a lot of the time, ego does get in the way of leadership, and especially when we're burning out, ego can go out the window because we're now defended, because we're scared. And that's the role that ego plays, I think, in keeping us safe, but it sort of turns in on us when we're burning out. So from all of the research we did with UCL into this, it was so abundantly clear that when you're more conscious as a leader, you're more engaged, your well-being is higher, you perform better, and you're generally going to have a lesser risk of burnout. So we've now created this leadership model which does all of this. You don't have to figure it out, it's here. It works. I've been using it now over the last 8 years. I've used it in the MOD, as I said, with JP Morgan Chase, with other big organizations and smaller teams, and it just works. It does cut through the noise of what I should be doing and what I'm what I shouldn't be doing. Because, as a burnt out leader, you're probably not giving clear communication or direction. You're micromanaging. You are, unaware of your impact potentially. You're withdrawing. You're not necessarily as connected as you should be. You're potentially giving false hope. You're letting people down because you're just doing the best that you can. But, it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to be there for everybody else when you can barely sort of, keep on top of your own workload. But in contrast, when you start using those 7 traits of conscious leaders, what are you doing? Well, you're giving clear direction, you're keeping everyone aligned, and you're coaching people to perform. You're staying connected to them, you're creating a safe environment, and you're being realistic, and you are able to handle mistakes because you're not on a knife edge sort of thinking, oh no, I hope nothing goes wrong. And we've all experienced those feelings. So we deliver all of this in a sort of microdose learning way. We recognize that long programs don't necessarily have the impact that we'd want them to, and actually this sort of behavioral orientation is really better developed through like microdose learning. So we've tried various different options over the last few years to see what really works, and what really does work is where you give this ongoing education to leaders around what does work, including some of what I've told you today. You give them executive coaching, not as a remedial thing, but as a standard thing. But also you create a peer support environment where those leaders are actually working together and supporting each other. And so you're giving them permission to be imperfect and to be human and to share their woes and their burdens. And that is incredibly powerful when you create that sort of community. So you move away from, train for capability, then the leader burns out, then their performance is repressed or suppressed, and so is the team's. And then you potentially have some sort of employee turnover to, you're training them, then you're giving them the opportunity to replenish, then you're reinforcing the learning. And then, of course, from that, performance flows. And I've just written an article for Leader to Leader magazine. And so if we gather all of your contact details, I'll let you have that when it gets published. It won't be for a few months. But I was incredibly lucky to have Alan Mullally, who was the former CEO of Ford, get in touch with me recently to basically say he'd read an article about my conscious leadership model, and that he finally saw in a model how he turned the fortunes of Ford around when he went in there in 2006, when it was a 12.7 billion loss-making company, and he turned it around to being in the green by 6.6 billion by 2010. And he said it was sort of using all of the things that I'd captured in the conscious leadership model, and you'll see some of them here. It's just huge validation that this works. When you create an environment of togetherness where people feel safe, and where they support each other, and where mistakes happen, but we will get through it together, and where you give leaders the coaching and the support that they need and create these psychological safe leadership sort of peer community environments, makes a massive difference. So I know that David would be like, she's taking up too much time. I knew she wouldn't be able to get through all of these slides quickly, so I will try and bring this to a close.
Not at all. You're doing brilliantly. Carry on.
Thank you. That's very lovely peer support in a psychologically safe environment. The transformation is conscious leaders, when you put time and effort into helping them to develop those capabilities and also the capacity, they feel psychologically safer. They create psychologically safe environments. They then can support the creation of coaching and learning cultures where people feel supported, and then engagement will flourish and flow from that. And then, of course, you're retaining people, and then people are going to be more adaptable, and then performance flows. That's the link. Just get these leaders set up for success at the start, which requires a slightly different focus, maybe to the one that we've always thought it was. And they will be able to do the work for you, because it just happens, less about engagement plans, although of course they are important, and more about leaders just knowing how to engage people. So it's all, I've told you that, this is a good investment. We can demonstrate ROI from the investment in this area. I have seen such incredible results from the organizations that I've worked with, because all you're really doing is saying to leaders, like, I see you and I know that it can be hard, so we're going to come and support you. And then, we support them in the way that we would always have wanted to have supported our employees, but they just become part of the wider employee group. So I won't say any more. There's all sorts of ways in which we come in and help you to solve this problem. So obviously, if that's something that's of interest to you, then please do reach out. But I will pass back to you, David, to finish things off.
That has been brilliant. Thank you so much, Natasha. That was absolutely dripping in data and insights. And we've like I said at the start, we've had loads of questions emailed in beforehand. I've been making notes of questions that I'd like to ask you as well whilst we've got you.
Right.
Joe, do you want to start off with the first one? Okay, so first question, how do you actually measure leadership burnout in practice? What are the early warning signs we should be looking for?
Okay, well, I mean, without turkeys voting for Christmas, we've got a psychometric that measures leadership burnout. But the signs that you should be looking for is really in all of your other data. Like, I would argue that if you've got low engagement data, or if it's going downwards, or if you've got problems with sickness in your organization or retention, I would go back to an upstream problem, and that will be the leaders. Like, I mean, this isn't new news, is it? We've known for a very, very long time. But actually, I mean, we now can provide data that helps organizations actually see how their leaders are feeling. So that's helpful. It's just another data point. But, you know, I think that if you've got issues around other data points in your organizations, it's fair to say now that we've got all of the research that leadership burnout could well be a problem for you.
Thank you. So one of the questions I made a note of myself was, obviously you've spoken a lot about really the impact of burnout on senior leaders and how that impacts the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
Do you see this the same issues and the same consequences happening when it's the middle management layout feeling burnout too?
Yeah, and arguably they've got less control over their destiny, so it's even harder. In fact, so I was running a workshop last week with a group of younger leaders. I mean, they're like junior leaders. They weren't even mid-management, I would say. And they completed an enabling leadership assessment that we've got. So it just helps them to assess what they're already doing well and where the gaps are. And a couple of the people in that room, and this is the first time I'd ever heard this, which was interesting, said, I was a better leader before. So we got into a conversation about that. And they said, no, I was definitely leading better like 1-2 years ago. I can't do this stuff. I haven't got time. I haven't got time to do this stuff anymore. I used to sit down with my team really regularly and talk to them. You know, I used to be much clearer about what the priorities were and be able to give them clearer direction. And I just thought, wow, you know, I mean, that's a very, very small sample, but yeah, it cuts right across the piece. The issue I see with more junior leaders, so less experienced, is that they've got double whammy of a problem, because a lot of them just haven't developed the capability yet, and now they have a capacity issue too. Whereas often with the more senior leaders, they're longer in the tooth. They've screwed up multiple times. They've built some more capability. So actually, we're now looking at capacity. Whereas, you know, at the start of that leadership journey, you do need to learn both things.
Yeah, and managing upwards is a skill as well.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. Yeah, and of course, you know, if you've got a burnt out senior leader above you, that's just hugely problematic. I mean, we see all sorts of problems. And actually, I've concluded that where we see what we would call toxic organizations, where you see lots of really bad behavior, I generally think it's not bad people in these organizations, it's just broken people. So, you know, if we can help them to not be broken, then that helps everyone.
Yeah, we say this all the time. People don't generally show up to work in order to do a bad job or to be horrible people.
No,
it's something systemic that's broken when that's the case.
Yeah, and of course, now that we're getting sort of increasing knowledge about things like neurodiversity as well, we're all so uniquely different, aren't we? And ideally, you want to work in an environment that helps you to work in a way, actually, that just helps you to bring out your best. But, you know, a lot of environments at the moment just aren't doing that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I'm sucking up too much time from everyone else's questions. Apologies. So, Joe, if you want to tee up the next one. So could you give us an example of one or two of the conscious leader characteristics in action? What does it look like day to day?
Yeah, okay. Which one should I choose? Well, why don't we start with the CU trait?
Mm-hmm.
So where a leader really does see the members of their team, it means that they will be connected to them. They will show up when they say they're going to. So, if there's a one-to-one meeting in the diary, they're not bumping that for some other meeting. They're actually there. So they show that you are valued. They're having conversations with you that are wide-ranging about who you are, what your strengths are, what you enjoy, what you want to do, what you love, what you're really good at, what you're not so good at, what's stressing you out, all of it. They actually get to know you. They know who you are. And because of that, they create this sort of psychological safety. And then I think the present one is really important too, because I've started to see this erode more and more in organisations, and I think it's causing loads of issues. So I think because leaders are so busy, they're struggling to be present. So one, they're just not around as much. Two, they're not as responsive. They're not responding to emails. It means that approvals aren't getting sorted, which means that then everybody's work's being slowed up. They're not necessarily doing the things they said they were going to do. Like, the erosion of trust when all of those things are happening is immense. Like, I don't think people recognize the significance of those day-to-day micro acts in terms of building a trusting, safe, psychologically safe environment where people really want to do their best work and where engagement is high. Every single time you move a one-to-one, every single time somebody's like, I haven't heard back from my leader, like, I don't know what's going on. It's an erosion of trust and therefore engagement. So they see you and they are present are just so important. But of course, that's hard, isn't it? Because leaders are so busy.
Great. Thank you very much. I think we've probably got time for one more question. Even if we can't answer all the questions that you've got for us, do still pop them into the chat because we can follow up by email afterwards. So, Joe, do you want to pop up the final question for today? So, how do you help leaders who are already burnt out? Is this purely preventative, or can it help people recover while still in role?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it depends on where they are on the scale, obviously. If they're right at the very end. I've coached many leaders who are right at the very end. Do I have an example of where we've kept them in play? I would say if you're at the very end, you need time off. So don't get to the very end.
That's where you're experiencing sort of physical symptoms of burnout.
Yeah, and you've totally lost all of your confidence, and you are so depleted that you're struggling to, no amount of sleep or going to the gym or trying to take care of yourself is solving the problem. You just need a break. But apart from that, yeah, you can row the boat back. You can definitely, because a lot of the time it's about helping the leader to understand what is contributing to the way that they're feeling. And sort of as soon as they get their head around that, they can start doing things differently, whether that be setting clear boundaries, building their confidence back up and realizing it's not them. It's just, a symptom of modern day work. Help them to focus on the things that they're not focused on as much at the moment, get them to recognize that they're holding too much of a burden on their own. Sometimes, I always think this is a funny one, but sometimes you do have to just encourage them to care less. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but as was my case too, there's only so much you can care before you need to just be like, I just do the best that I can. Like, if everybody around you doesn't care as much as you do about fixing something, for instance, like, there's only so much you can care before it will actually break you. Sometimes it's just about going, you know what, okay, like, I'll either have patience or I'll take a different approach. I'll formulate a different strategy, because the caring so much and not actually moving the dial in the way that you want to is a killer.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And look, Natasha, thank you so much for all of your time and insights that you've shared with us today. It's been absolutely brilliant. Everyone who's joined us today, thank you so much as well for your time, and thanks for taking part in all the polls. It's been really interesting to see where it is that you're focusing and any areas that you're finding especially challenging. So hope to see you all on another of our webinars, or perhaps one of our events that we've got coming up. Natasha, again, thank you so much. So much work of yours has gone into that presentation. It's been enormously valuable. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.